Hey guys, Miss Algar here, and you're watching part 3 of the Modifiers in Narrative Prose series. Today we're looking at another 2 types of modifiers. We're looking at the appositive and the use of 2 adjectives after the noun. And these both have to do with describing the noun or the subject in a manner different than what we're used to. So let's quickly take a look at the definition of these. Appositives identify or rename an adjacent noun or pronoun. Okay, so how does this work? Let's take a look at a couple of examples. So we can see the appositive standing alone, a hot-tempered tennis player, a large cockroach with hairy legs, the messiest eater at the table. Is almost like a little bit familiar to us, and I can tell you that something we've studied before, which are Homeric epithets, can be considered an appositive phrase. So let's see how these work in sentences. So the first one says, Robbie, a hot-tempered tennis player, charged the umpire and tried to crack the poor man's skull with a racket. Looks like this guy's taking after John McEnroe. But you can see that this phrase right here obviously is describing Robbie. So here we are with the renaming or identifying who this subject is, who our subject is. Let's quickly go to the next one, which I think is a better example. So the insect, comma, a large cockroach with hairy legs, comma, is crawling across the kitchen table. Without that appositive phrase in here, we're looking at the insect is crawling across the kitchen table. But now, with the appositive phrase, we can clearly see that the insect being described is a large cockroach with hairy legs. Let's look at this last one. The messiest eater at the table. Okay? Clifford, comma, the messiest eater at the table, comma, spewed mashed potatoes like an erupting volcano. So we see here again, we now know that Clifford, we've added this characteristic in which we've identified him as the messiest eater at the table. And so we get a little bit more context, as we do with all of these. The appositive is able to give us a little bit more context as to why that person, why they would be acting that way, or gives us a little bit more context to the situation at hand. The 2 adjectives after a noun seems like the easiest type of modifier, you would think, but a lot of people struggle with it. And typically this is done, the placing of the 2 adjectives after a noun instead of before it, in order to kind of slow down writing and to bring in that desired close-up effect. Okay, like we talked about. So I have a couple of examples for you, and the phrases that I have are old and wrinkled, exhausted yet satisfied, and cranky and hungry. So let's take a look at how we've used this. So typically when we write sentences, they are, you've got your definite article or indefinite. And then you have your noun. First we have the adjective, and then we have the noun, right? We just looked at this with coordinate adjectives. But this time, we're flipping it a little bit. In order to kind of slow down our writing, instead of saying, right, the old and wrinkled grandma gripped her cane tightly as she climbed the stairs, right, which gives us that very wide shot of a grandma coming down the stairs. Now we've got the grandma, old and wrinkled, gripped her cane tightly as she climbed the stairs. Did you hear the pause that I took when I said my phrase? That is what placing the two adjectives after the noun does for you in your writing. It slows it down to bring the focus right onto your subject and then lets you kind of pan out to see the rest of the picture. Right, so let's take a look at some other ones. Now, these two adjectives after a noun are typically used coordinating conjunctions. Coordinating conjunctions are fanboys, right? Are fanboys. So let's take a look at this one. It says, at 2 a.m., Stacy, exhausted yet satisfied, finally closed her textbook. She now felt ready for her exam. So you can see that I have a comma there and no comma here. And that's up to you, whether or not you put it there or not. Usually in these shorter phrases, it's not necessary, so that your sentence isn't littered with commas. But you can see here that we kind of create this image, right, of a very exhausted Stacy, but she feels satisfied, right, because she now, right, and it sets us up for this final clause here where it says she now felt ready for her exam, right. So again, we've got the close-up panning out. And lastly, this one right here. The twin sons, cranky and hungry, suddenly shut down and threw a joint temper tantrum as they stood in the long line at the bank. So again, we can see this very close-up scene of two cranky and hungry young twins and suddenly kind of, shutting down because they're so hungry as they stand in line with their dad and throwing a temper tantrum, right? Again, we've got that effect of beginning with a close-up and moving towards that panning out, that zooming out to see the big picture. So now let's recap. What have we learned today? So we learned about two additional types of modifiers. The first being the appositive, right, in which we learn that this renames or identifies a noun, typically the subject of your sentence. And this is just a good example of this, right, that we are familiar with, is that Homeric epithet, that Odysseus, raider of cities, right, is an example of an appositive phrase. The other thing we learned about today are the two adjectives after the noun, which is done to slow down writing and create that pause to draw your eyes in, right? Drawing our eyes in. Pretend that's our subject there. Drawing our eyes into our subject, and as we move forward from the description of the two adjectives, we then are able to move outwards and see what else is going on in the background. Okay, for any questions, please leave them in the comments or post it on the bulletin board. Thank you for watching.